So in 3, 2, 1, we should be live. It says live in my top left-hand corner. So as ever with these things, I am always very nervous. So we're either talking to the wonderful world of LinkedIn or we're talking to ourselves. Either way, it's going to be a great discussion. So thank you very much for tuning in. If you are watching this afternoon, very welcome to you all, and thanks very much for tuning in. And thank you very much to my special panel guests today. We've got the lovely Katie Stabler and Miles Courtney-Thomas, who I will let introduce themselves in just a short moment. But we're talking about a customer-centric contact strategies today, and how do we help contact centers craft, and what do we actually mean when we talk about customer centricity. So we're delving into the depths of customer centricity, and we're going to be sharing some stories, tips, questions, hints, all sorts of stuff from Katie and Miles, from their vast experience in all things customer experience. But the question remains is, how do you guys do it at home? So if you are tuning in and you've got a question today about what we can do to improve your customer centricity, or if there's something that might be impacting your customer experience that you want to have a question that you want to pose to the panel, or if you've just got your own thoughts and musings, we want you to share it into the comments, because we'll be able to bring it up onto the screen and we'll be able to either fire a question to one of our panelists, or we'll be able to share your thoughts and use that as a little bit of a topic. But in true Blue Peter fashion, we have prepared some questions in advance. So I've got some questions that we're going to be firing to the panel just to stimulate some conversation. And if you agree with some of the comments, or if you've got a question of your own, drop it into the comments and we will showcase it. But before we start that, I want to say hello, thank you, and welcome to my panel. So I'm going to be a gentleman. They say chivalry is dead, but it's not on the Contact Center Network show. And I'm going to introduce Katie first and let you give the audience a little bit of an intro into you, your background, and who you are, Katie. And then Miles will come across to yourself. So Katie, over to you.
Cool, thanks, Gary. Yeah, I'm Katie Stabler. I'm the founder and director of Cultivate Customer Experience by Design, which, surprise, surprise, is a customer experience consultancy. I've worked in customer experience for over a decade now, but Cultivate's been running for about 4.5 years. Industry agnostic, work with companies all over the globe in different industries, predominantly at the moment telecoms and airport. And I suppose I started my journey in customer experience like loads of people, in the contact centre, front line of Woolworths and Boots, if you're UK based. Woolworths, I know Paul Woolworths, but used to work in Woolworths on the lottery till, loved it, and pick and mix. That was great. And then I suppose my first proper job, out of uni, proper job, I started in not-for-profit. And, although they were not customer experience titled roles, I've always said, and I stand by it, that you don't get a more organically or a more holistically customer-centric company than a charity or a not-for-profit. So I think that gave me really good footings for finally taking the step into the world of corporate and having CX in my role titles and building from there.
Brilliant. Well, lovely to have you, and thanks very much for joining us today. And if you've got fond memories of Woolies, share it into the comments. I would say I've got some memories of my early experience in QuickSave, but they probably wouldn't be ones that I can share in the comments, hence why it doesn't exist anymore. Miles, thank you very much for joining. I'll let you do an equally interesting intro and give us a bit of a background as to, can you top Woolies, is the question.
Well, I don't think anyone can top Woolies, right? And the thing I remember about Woolies is the pick and mix. That was the thing. We went in with my grandparents on the weekend to go and do that. That was an amazing experience in itself. But no, thank you, Gary, Katie. So I'm Miles Courtney-Thomas. I'm the co-founder of Customer Start. We are a customer experience consultancy providing training, research, and lots of other services to help companies understand the importance of customer experience and how it can help them. So I've been working in this field for many years. I won't give you the exact number of years because it'll tell you how old I am. But I've similarly worked across both profit and non-for-profit. So I spent 10 years working at the International Baccalaureate, which was fabulous, a very different feel to what you get in corporate areas. but also some great scale ups as well. I would say that probably the most customer centric organization I've ever worked for is Bloom and Wild, where I was the head of customer delight, believe it or not. So really good to get that experience of working across very different types of businesses. And that's really helped me in the work that we do at Customer Start to really drill down on what's important for different types of customers around non-profit, profit, fintech, educational, all those other areas. So it's been a lot of fun. We've been running not as long as Katie in this area. So we've been running about 2 years now, 2.5 years.
Brilliant. Well, again, thank you very much for joining, and I'm sure we're going to get into some really interesting discussion today. If you are tuning in, please let us know where you are dialing in from. We've had some really interesting destinations in the past, so see how far and wide we are reaching. So please share with us, use it as an opportunity to network, get to know people, introduce yourselves and where you are coming from. And with that said, we will start digging into some of the questions that we've got prepared. But if you do have a question today, feel free to drop it into the comments, and we'll share it on the screen, and we'll put it to one of the panelists. But I'm going to start with some pre-prepared questions that we started with just a couple of weeks ago when we were preparing for this. And I think the obvious place to start, and I'm going to start with yourself, Katie, is we talk a good game sometimes about customer centricity, don't we? But what do we actually mean when we say customer centricity? So what does customer centricity mean to you, and how do you think it impacts contact center operations? I'm going to start with you, Katie, and then Miles, I'm going to let you build on as well.
I think that's a really interesting question. And, whenever I start working with a new client or a new team, I always do start with that alignment of not necessarily what is customer centricity, but what is customer experience, and build from that, because we all are customers, right? We all know what a good customer experience looks and feels like. But likewise, we all have our own views and perceptions of what these terms actually mean. So for me, customer centricity is really where the pulse of the organization, your blood flows customer, basically. So we are talking about customer-centric policies, processes designed around customer understanding wants and needs and meeting expectations. People hired with customer-facing values in their ability, in their skill set, in what they believe and how they act. Customer strategies, customer visions, customer mission statements, all of these things, customer, but actually where they mean something, where we actually are designing and using all of these customer-facing policies, programs, training, etc., to be customer-centric. And I think I was actually just doing some training around, it was building a customer vision statement. So we were talking a lot about customer centricity. And there's this really interesting methodology I came up that I found. I can't remember the gentleman's name actually who created it, but it's very common and it's been around a long time. But it's where, when you're talking about customer centricity and culture, a couple of things come into the mix. So we have espoused values, which are our ambition, our customer visions, our public-facing strategies, which say, this is what we want to do for our customers. This is how we perceive our customers. These are our hopes and goals for our customers. And then underneath that, we have our underlying assumptions, which might actually be less customer-centric than our vision statements and missions and strategies are. It might be more along the lines of, well, we have stakeholders to make happy. We need to achieve a certain level of profit this quarter. And when we're talking about customer centricity, what I tend to find in organizations is the espoused values and the underlying assumptions don't always meet. And that's natural, but it's how can we bring them closer together and move forward as an organization to actually be customer centric.
Yeah, and I think that can change from department to department based on the wider business mission, vision, goals, and objectives we set. Miles, if I was to ask you in terms of what you would define customer centricity as, would it match Katie's, or is there anything different that you bring there?
I think it would. Katie's done a really good job there of explaining customer centricity in the contact center. I think one of the things that I've seen a lot of is that for many companies, they will talk about the vision, they'll talk about the mission, they'll go out and they'll put some posters up on the wall, and then they'll tick a box and say, right, that's it, we're done. What really needs to happen there is about how those, how the mission, the vision, the values translate into the everyday work of every single employee within an organization. And that's about rewarding the right behaviors, making sure those values are being promoted in the right way. And I think for contact centers specifically, it's about moving past this this mindset that contact center staff are there to answer a query and that's it. What you can really do to help bolster the right culture, of course, is rewarding the right values, but it's enabling those people who are at the front line, who have more knowledge probably than anyone else in the organization about the frictions and frustrations that customers are facing, to get involved in change initiatives, get them into a workshop and say, right, what are the things that are causing the friction and the pain for our customers? Yeah. And work to see those things changed in a proper, rich change environment. Honestly, there's so much in there. It will help with the culture of the organization. Employees will feel more valued. They'll feel that they have a voice within the operation, and that they can actually make change happen, both for their own benefit, but also for the benefit of customers as well.
Yeah, and I know when we had some conversations pre this, Miles, one of the things that you were mentioning as part of that is how we, I suppose, have that organizational pull for people, and how we translate the cost center mentality of customer centricity into more of a value center piece, so we can empower people. What's your thoughts on how well we're nailing those two pieces at the moment?
I don't think we're there yet. Let's put it that way. But what I can tell you from my own experience at the International Baccalaureate, when I started there, it was very much the idea, or the strategy was to have people sat in seats answering canned responses to queries coming through. And that's a poor ideology or a poor vision, because humans are capable of so much more than just that. What I did at the IB actually is we turned things around to get the team involved in truly looking at the data, reading the feedback from customers, and actually ideating ways in which we could be more proactive in the way that we work. So at the IB, it was an educational organization. Certain parts of the year, you're seeing particular peaks and troughs. So we understood what those peaks are. We understood exactly the types of queries coming through, and we proactively pushed information out ahead of that time to say, around this time of year, you're probably going to be thinking about these 5 things. Here's some answers to you. And we'd run a webinar, we'd put out some knowledge-based articles, whatever that might be. And that's just one example. But the actual difference from having people sat there just answering queries every day with nothing really changing, nothing really improving, it's a very boring role in that sense, to suddenly feeling themselves that they had a big part to play in helping build the right experience to protect the brand, protect the organization, and make customers feel really valued and that we understand them.
Yeah. And Katie, I'm going to build on one of the points that you mentioned earlier around that kind of, I suppose, that piece that's not quite fitting when we've got objectives over here, we've got customer centricity over here, and we've got that misalignment around objectives. Because obviously in the contact center, what we're trying to do is we're trying to balance the efficiency metrics, and we're trying to balance customer satisfaction, and those don't always meet, as you said earlier. So I've got a question around how do you think contact centers can balance efficiency and customer satisfaction to get those in equilibrium?
Oh, I think that's a challenge that we are going to be forever facing, right? Because efficiencies are important. At the end of the day, we are businesses, and we have to operate in an efficient way, and we have to make money. But I think, when we're talking about customer experience, in order to know when we're talking at metrics, what we need to measure, we really need to understand the customer. And that's the first and most important point. Quite often we pull arbitrary metrics out of the air and pop it in and say, right, we're going to make this target, and this is what we're aspiring to.
Old school.
And they've come from something. Once upon a time, these measures, these metrics were valuable, but actually I think we have progressed so much as organizations, and we do understand that actually service delivery, yes, it's important, but experience delivery is incredibly important. And I think it was the Qualtrics research from last year, which was released at the beginning of this year, which showed that customers' quality of product is absolutely top, but then it's customer service over price. So it's the service that people get. People they want a good experience. They want a good service. So what is good? We have to understand what our customers actually want, and then apply measures that measure that. And there is this common thing that I think a lot of companies fall foul of, which is the watermelon effect. So we have these, typical SLAs, first time resolution, call handling time, etc. Yes, okay, they do something somewhere for service optimization and efficiencies, but do they say anything for customer experience? We could be ticking all of our boxes. Everything looks green, so they're the skin of the watermelon as far as our efficiencies and service delivery go. But inside, we still have red because we have unhappy customers, or we don't have optimized customer experience. And this is us falling foul of focusing too heavily on those operational efficiency metrics and not enough on customer experience focused metrics. So I think it's about finding balance.
Yeah, and you know what? I've been on the thick end of a red rag rated operational warboard, and when everything's going Pete Tong, customer satisfaction or customer experience tends to be, let's just get the calls answered, let's just get the calls wrapped up, and let's get people moving. And I think I always talk about employee experience and operational excellence is a key driver of great customer outcomes. And when you start to put all those things together, if you're starting to build foundations on a rocky operation, it's never really going to get you into that space where you're delivering good customer outcomes. So I think you've got an absolute point there, is to say, right, how do we balance the two? And one of the things we talked about as metrics, Miles, is the time on the call, and how we kind of focus on that operational agent metric. What's your view on how we focus on the amount of, I suppose, time and energy we invest into what's happening on calls?
Yeah. So just to say, I can imagine an executive coming down and saying, well, why is our customer service, why is our CSAT so bad when our average handling time is brilliant? We're dealing with every customer in 35 seconds. Well, okay, I think I can probably give you a good answer as to why that is. Finding that balance is so important. Yes, you need the operational efficiency. I don't think that we should be using something like average handling time as a stick to employees to say, you haven't met this and therefore you're getting a lower bonus, whatever that might be, because that's a really direct correlation there between customer centricity and operational effectiveness and how they are pulling in different directions. The employees at the front line need to be rewarded for doing what's right for the customer. And I think that's the bit that's missing. Yes, we should monitor things like average handling time, because if we find a particular individual who is regularly taking an hour on every call, then that's a training opportunity for me. It's about sitting down with that person to understand why that's happening when it's not happening to others as well. So there's that bit there. It does need to be the operational efficiency is important. But what I'd advise almost any company to do, and to do this periodically, is to go right back to basics and say, right, why are we here? What's our reason to exist? What product or service do we offer that provides value to customers? What is that value proposition we've got? And then how are we measuring it? So when you think about customer experience, it's very much about, number one, enabling customers to achieve their objectives, whatever that might be. It might be getting an answer to a question in the contact center scenario, enabling them to get their jobs done. So that's number one. Number two is the level of effort that's required for a customer to get that job done. So, you can get it done, but it's really hard, then that's a detractor. And then number three, how you make customers feel at the end of it. So I think what I'm saying here is that there does need to be a mix of metrics. But what I see as a mistake for many organizations is that they're not measuring those specific value propositions that they are espousing to, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And, I entirely agree. And I think the piece for me is you can't be truly customer centric if you're constantly pushing, we need to save another 5% on FTE. We need to save another FTE on a customer facing FTE. What you can do is you can say, right, where do we make efficiencies using technology that might help save FTE and save on budget? But I think when we've got situations where your planning team and your operational team and your customer satisfaction levels aren't aligned, then that really kind of says to me that customer centricity isn't important for this organization. It's all about cost and profit. And it goes back to that cost center versus value center, and how you start to kind of unpick, I suppose, some of the challenges that running a contact center brings. Going to move on, and I'm going to focus a little bit on, because we've already touched on it a little bit around kind of metrics. But I think whenever we start to think about customer experience, and whenever we start to think about customer centricity, we've got that whole piece in the middle that sits around customer feedback. So if I was to ask you, Miles, I'm going to start with yourself. What are the most important customer feedback metrics that should drive a customer centric strategy in the contact center?
I think there are some quite well-known approaches to do this. So for me, CSAT's pretty good. I mean, it's out there, it has a purpose. So you've got CSAT, you've got customer effort score or net easy score. So that's a variation that can be quite useful as well. And then you've got a sentiment score, and that can be a transactional NPS, but I'd think very carefully about that. For me, that follows those 3 golden rules as well. You're talking about, okay, in a contact center, question number 1, did we resolve your query to your level of satisfaction? Yes or no? If there's a no, immediately that feedback should be going straight back into the operational flow to say, oops, maybe a problem here. Let's look at service recovery and see how quickly we can change that around. Now, I tend to advise taking a sort of A-B-C test approach to this, because what you don't want to do is have customers having to answer, yeah, my query was resolved. Yes, the level of effort was okay. CSAT is a 5, and there's a load of text beneath it as well. So what I do is an ABC test across those 3 questions and then amalgamate them back together. I think that's probably one of the best ways that I've seen to do it.
Mm-hmm. I like that idea, and I think I particularly like the ease part that you're talking about. Whenever I chat to customers, it's more about how easy was the process, how easy did we make that experience for you, rather than would you recommend, which is good to have in the mix. But I think the important part for a customer is how easy was it to resolve my query. Katie, what's your thoughts on the feedback metrics that we should be including as part of our wider strategy?
Yeah, I agree with those points. And I think when it comes to customer ease, customer effort, the research year on year just shows more strongly that is what also one of the biggest determinants of loyalty. So I think companies who aren't utilizing ease or effort scores should be, really. But then again, it comes back to that whole point of, are we making it easy, and are we creating a good customer experience? If we're constantly asking our customers, are we doing a good customer experience? Are you satisfied? Are you happy? So I think there's a whole thing in actually asking, and obviously with the use of the new technology that is ever emerging and developing, there are just so many other ways as well of utilizing or gaining customer insight without actually having to ask. I'm not saying we should never ask, but I think we are, or perhaps should be thinking about becoming less reliant on it interrupting the experience by asking these questions. Ultimately, though, I think whatever we're talking about, no matter what the metric is, we tend to look at them very siloed, like we do in a lot of ways with other things. We have somebody who'd be looking after voice of the customer. If you're fortunate, you might have somebody looking after voice of the process. So, doing a bit of customer journey mapping and understanding that whole experience. You might have your user data and information available. You might have employee data and insight. You've got all these pockets which give you amazing customer insight. All of these different metrics that we measure, chuck in some KPIs and SLAs, put them in the mix too. But we don't put them together. We don't look at them organically. So we've got all of these kind of slightly biased views of customer experience. I mean, like one of the most examples is if we just looked at voice of the customer, we all know that what customers tell us and what they say isn't necessarily always how they behave and represents what they do. So if you just very simply put user data and voice of the customer together, then you can actually see, where is the misalignment and where do we need to dig a little bit more deeply. So it's less about the particular metrics you're using, but it's more about how you use them. And I'm sure I read some statistics. I think, I want to say customer gauge. I don't know. Actually, don't quote me on that. But there was some data this year I read recently. It's something like 17% of companies actually holistically, robustly bring all of the customer insight and metrics together, and therefore have a really strong enough picture and understanding to make real, genuine, good data-driven decisions.
Or you're talking my language there. And I think the biggest thing that I observe when it comes to whatever you're asking, whether you're asking NPS, whether you're asking ease scores, effort scores, whatever you want to call it, there is a big chunk of customers that don't actually complete those surveys. So there is only a small percentage of people that we're actually hearing from. But a lot of the time in the contact center, we are recording everything. So we've got all of this unstructured data that we're really not making the most of it. And you touched on it, Miles, in terms of sentiment of customer and how we can do some of that analysis. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I think it's a key point to kind of say, right, if you aren't asking for scores, if you aren't asking for effort scores, how do we extract the value in the conversation that's happening that we might not necessarily be drawing all those insights from? Katie, I'm going to start with you on that. And then Miles, I'm going to ask for your input in terms of how you're seeing some of that data being harvested. Katie, what's your thoughts?
Well, your conversational analytics is an easy go-to here, and it's been around years. I mean, I remember my first corporate CX role, so we're talking kind of over 10 years ago now. It was working for one of Europe's largest debt collection companies. Yes, you heard me right, debt collection and customer experience, they do exist. But they used, we used at the time a company called Big Ears, who are still going strong. Hey to Big Ears. And they are a voice of the customer platform, but actual voice. So when people were giving feedback, they would give audio feedback. And I mean, that was amazing on so many levels, but you could hear that sentiment. And in the background, their platform was actually analyzing that sentiment as well. So picking out all of the positive and negative emotions. And obviously, since that time, the technology has grown tenfold, and there are loads of companies who offer fantastic services with conversational analytics, which for anybody who hasn't heard of that or isn't using it yet, is quite simply just technology that attaches to telephone calls, web chat, emails, social media interactions. And to your point, Gary, all of that unstructured data that sits in the ether now can very easily become structured and give us, oh my gosh, just overwhelming amounts of insight. It's just a matter of how we use it. So I'm very shocked these days if I come across a company who isn't in some way utilizing conversational analytics or isn't thinking about utilizing it. Definitely.
And Miles, any additional build on that?
Well, Katie's spot on there. I mean, the tools available today to companies, their capabilities are astounding, no doubt about it. So yes, conversational analytics, which of course can look into the written word as well as just the spoken words. So it can read through all of the queries you've had coming through and estimate the level of frustration or adoration within each ticket. Of course, moving slightly into more structured data a little bit, but just through the reasons for contact to start with. Now, one of the biggest problems I've seen across some different companies is the inability to create the right levels of taxonomy or categorization within tickets. So for many companies, it's quite unstructured. They're broad buckets, they're mixed buckets. You can't really get a good picture. A really good thing to do is go back and have a look at how you're structuring that data around those incoming tickets for the reasons for contact. The bottom line of all of this is that every time a customer needs to contact your company, they're taking away from their own valuable time to do that. They don't want to do that. What companies need to be doing is trying to work out ways to mitigate or remove the need for contact in the first place. And that's a continuous improvement effort. And it will use voice of the customer, voice of the process in a much more holistic way. So I think Katie mentioned about some company, it was the debt recovery company, that really were looking at this in a big holistic way. And that sounds really scary, actually. If you're a smaller company thinking, oh my goodness, what does this mean? But if you start along the right path and say, right, we've got this, what else should we look at, and bring that in and do it in stages, you will end up at a place where you've got some really rich data and you won't waste hundreds of thousands of pounds or maybe even millions of pounds changing a process, changing a technology based upon just a few squeaky wheels voices that you've heard that have got to the exec board. You've got to be very careful about that.
Definitely. And you know what, I think you're both spot on in terms of how tools can help there. But I think one of the things that I used to rely on was that whole 5-bar gate process, is to say, right, how are we actually categorizing failure that's coming into the contact center, how we're categorizing value calls, and importantly then, how we closing the loop. And I think a really strong closed loop feedback program can really start to remove some of the demand and remove some of the dissatisfaction that comes into that. But we need people to be engaged to do that, and we need our teams to want to get on board the customer centricity train. So my question, and I'm going to start with yourself on this one, Katie, is to say, right, what role does employee engagement play in creating a customer centric contact center?
Oh, huge on so many levels. I mean, we all know, right, that you don't have a good customer experience without a good employee experience. And where it starts, chicken and egg. But all of the research shows that the more engaged you have as an employee, the better the customer experience. And then you can get anecdotal, get my words out, anecdotal research. If you just look at the top 100 places to work, like Forbes, Glassdoor, obviously these are scales which are voted for by employees, saying these are the best places to work. And surprise, those companies also have excellent customer experience, top the leagues with CSAT and NPS. So I think the CX EX thing is massively important. When we're talking about customer centricity, we're not customer centric if it doesn't touch every single employee in the company, right? We all have to be singing off the same hymn sheet. We all have to be aspiring towards the same service level. You have to have your team engaged in that. One, because of the design element, your people know your customer experience just a little bit less than your actual customers. Nobody else knows it better than your people, particularly your frontline people. So you can't build customer-centric processes, strategies, policies without engaging them. But then also you can't bring any of this to life without your without your employees believing in it and buying into it and having skin in the game. So twofold, design and actual practice, you absolutely need to have an engaged workforce.
Definitely. And you've touched on some really good things there. I mean, that whole insight piece that comes from your agents and how cross-functionally people work together to share those insights, and how kind of bridge the gap along the process, because we work in silos often, don't we? So actually, if we can bring some more cross-functional working to the table, we understand each other's customer journeys, we understand each other's frustrations, and we understand the conversation that's happening at each part. And I think that's an important part, Miles, to bring in people and bring in the team to get them engaged. But how do we get agents more involved in it, and what might be stopping people from engaging their teams successfully to do that?
Yeah, so again, just to reiterate, the link between EX and CX is absolutely solid. It really is. Nothing says customer centricity like thinking about your employees in the same way that you think about your customers. So I talked about those 3 rules earlier about, able to get the job done, level of ease, and how they felt as a result. The same is absolutely true for employees. They want to feel that they can get their job done, be the best version of themselves. They want it to be relatively easy. Of course, they don't want to sit back and press a button and that's 1,000 tickets dealt with. We've got to have a bit of balance there. And they want to feel valued as well. Now, for organizations that really think about this well, there's a third factor that I find works as a perfect trilogy. So you've got employee experience, you've got customer experience, and then you've got something called servant leadership. For me, servant leadership is such a powerful indicator of customer centricity within an organization. Why? Because they co-collaborate on the creation of the strategy and the goals for the organization and for their teams. The servant leader, their role is then to ensure they do everything within their power to make sure their team can be successful in achieving that as well. So they give them the best tools, the better technology, training, and actual support as well. And how does that then translate into customer centricity and employee engagement on the front line? Because they're prepared, they're trained, the company knows the types of queries that are likely to come in and offers the right solutions to the employees to give to the customers. So you've all worked in contact centers. You know what it's like when somebody phones you, they're distressed, they've got a problem, and I've seen this before. We've got a proper process for this that's going to delight that customer. And seeing that turnaround, whether you're on a video call, a telephone call, or whatever it else, the appreciation from the customer to the agent, that emotion and that feeling that you've actually helped to make someone's day a bit better, that's what I call employee engagement. And that's where customer centricity comes into it. A lot of companies just aren't there yet in thinking about these three areas as important factors. And some of them are still stuck in the very operational, average handling time, all of this stuff. But what I can do and what I can promise to a degree is that companies that really do start thinking about these three factors and start implementing them in a way that people feel the difference, that's the key bit, feel the difference, they will see a return on investment from doing that sort of work.
And you know what, I think you've touched on a really important point there around the role of leaders in supporting their teams to do a better job. And we've talked about closed loop feedback, and we've talked about that in the context of closing the loop with the customer. I think there is often an absence of closed loop feedback with agents around the things that they're raising that are impacting customer experience, that are impacting customer satisfaction levels, that have a direct impact on how customer centric we are, that we don't really close the loop well with an agent to say, right, thanks for raising that. This is what we've done with it. This is how it's impacting future experiences with customers. Would you agree with that statement, or are you seeing that work well in organizations?
I think it varies. I don't know if that's to me or Katie, but I do think it varies a great deal. You know, specifically speaking, I think I mentioned this earlier, but when an agent is coming up to you and saying, we're seeing this problem, it's recurring, we're having to deal with it and have workarounds to deal with it, you know, get that person in a room with the product team, with the development team, whoever it is, and, you know, whiteboard it out and say, right, this is the current journey, these are the current frictions. What we want it to look like is a bit more like this. And, you know, even to the point where the agent would phone back the customer after a proper fix has been put in and said, thanks so much for letting us know about that. We have now made a change, so you're never going to see that problem again. And we've done that because we value you as a customer. The employee will feel valued as well because their voice was listened to.
Are you seeing that in some of the conversations that you're having, Katie? Are you seeing that gap between the agent and the organization closing, or is it still quite a chasm?
Do you know, the companies I'm working with at the moment, I would say absolutely, yes, I am seeing that close. So one of the companies, a telecoms company, they've just invested in a huge training program where the entire company, so frontline engineers, you know, back office operational support, leadership team, everybody has had the same training, customer experience foundation, you know, kind of basic, but then particularly hitting on some of the challenges that this organization is facing. And okay, there's been ever so slight modifications and tweaks to particular groups just to make sure it absolutely hits the nail on the head. But they were deliberately trying to close that gap. They want everybody to have that same messaging. They want everybody to understand the customer strategy, and they want everybody to see the practical actions and the tactical actions that they're taking to help achieve that strategy. And they're not alone in that. I'm working with another company who are on a much earlier journey, and they're actually building out their customer vision, their customer journey mapping, their persona development, all of that early stage stuff, which they're hoping is going to help design the future customer experience. And again, it's completely multi-role, multi-disciplined, mix of 10 years, mix of experience. So they're bringing as wide a level of insight from the organization into those sessions as possible. So my personal experience at the moment is I'm actually seeing some really great steps forward in closing that gap.
Can I come back on that, Gary?
Inclusive organization, that one. Miles, yeah, feel free to jump on that.
I think that's brilliant, Katie, honestly. And it's reminding me of something that I think is super important around training. Just going and giving your frontline team customer service training is not going to change the needle, move the dial at all. In fact, something I truly believe in is that we need to be thinking differently about how we train people in customer service and contact center and everywhere else. In fact, every single individual at the front line should have at least a rudimentary understanding of the broader customer experience type approaches that can be used, because You move from having, worst case scenario, a team of automatons just answering queries with canned responses, to people that are going, do you know what? Why do we keep answering the same question? What can we do about it? Oh, I know. What I'll do is I'll talk to my boss, we'll arrange a workshop, and we'll see how we can change things up or move things around. That's what you want. That's where real value from the human mind comes from everyone in your organization, no matter what level they sit at.
Yeah. And I think you've touched on some really good examples, both of you there, around how people are doing things differently. If there was a particular experience that resonates the most in terms of an example where you've seen customer centricity being personified, is there a particular one that stands out for you, Miles?
Yeah, very much so. And I'll use the example of Bloom and Wild. I'm not sure if anyone who's watching this has ordered flowers from Bloom and Wild, but I'd probably put a few quid on it to say you probably had a pretty good experience. They are very, very customer centric. They do a lot of what we've been talking about today. But specifically, what Bloom and Wild have understood is that they cannot control the entire customer journey. And that's a really important thing to be aware of or be cognizant of. What I mean by that is the last mile. So when the flowers are delivered, they could be delivered by Royal Mail, DPD, whoever it might be. They could be for really important occasions, a funeral, a birthday, something like that. Now, occasionally, they don't turn up on time, or they turn up and the quality isn't good. What they've done at Bloom and Wild is they have put together a service recovery framework designed to delight customers. So if your flowers don't arrive on time or they're of poor quality and you contact Bloom and Wild, it's no quibble. What we'll do is we'll send you a fresh bunch and refund the cost of the order in the first place. Now, that's brilliant because, we're not really talking about service recovery paradox here, but we know how powerful service recovery paradox can be. It's twofold. The customer is sat there going, wow, do you know what? A company that didn't quite deliver what I wanted them to deliver, but they've accepted it, they've owned it, they've given me something more than I was expecting, makes me feel great. I'm going to get back, email them, say, thanks so much, really appreciate that. The employee feels great because they've actually helped to make someone's day a little bit better as well. So that's the example I would use.
Yeah. And I think, there's something in that around empowering your front line to make decisions around service recovery. And I think we sometimes create those delegated authority blockers, don't we? We say, if it's more than this amount, you need to escalate. If it's more than this, you need to escalate to this. And we create friction within the journey that just doesn't necessarily need to be there. So I really like how you've described Bloom and Wild's approach to empowering agents to make those decisions that's impacting customer satisfaction. And I think these different examples that I've seen across that in different organizations. Katie, from your perspective, is there a particular industry or company that stands out that's really nailing customer experience and a customer centric approach in your view? It might be a customer, it might be your own personal experience, but who stands out for you?
I've got too many to list, which actually is a nice positive, because often when we ask this question about when was the last good customer experience, we all tend to go, because we obviously so easily remember the negative. But actually, I could give you some examples of the ones that I already have. I'll throw in a different company. There's a customer experience consultancy that I'm working with, that I've been delivering some training to recently. It's basically like me delivering training to me. But why I think they're particularly good for CX is they are all wonderfully skilled, experienced, awesome customer experience consultants. But I like how they are bringing in another CX consultant, because to your point, we all do things differently. So they actually, they recognize, and they're not too full of pride or ego to say, we can learn from the wider industry and we don't want to be so insular. So we'll bring in someone external and independent just to not necessarily teach us, the practices and basics of CX that they know, but actually just bring in that wider industry insight. And I think, how awesome if you're their client, because they are that forward thinking that they're willing to say, there is stuff we don't know and we are going to continue to grow. Absolutely.
And, we couldn't talk about customer centricity, we couldn't talk about customer experience without referring to technology. And one of the key things that I'm seeing a shift in customer expectation is customers expecting you as their provider, their supplier, to understand them on a much deeper level, and to really think about how we, as organizations that communicate with customers, really personalize that interaction that we've got. So thinking about how we personalize the customer experience, how can contact centers personalize that in different ways using technology and embracing new innovations to become a little bit more customer centric, but without losing that human touch, I suppose, is a question. And I'm going to start with yourself on this one, Katie, if that's all right.
Yeah, although, wow, it's a big question.
I could do a whole webinar on that, but I'm
if we solve this, we can make millions.
Yeah. It's a hard question, right? Because we all know the benefits that technology can bring us. But when we're talking about that next level, you know, really kind of personalizing. Yeah, okay, we can talk about hyper personalization. We can talk about all that level of insight collection, which will enable us to be able to better understand our customers, and therefore, you know, targeted sales, targeted messaging, personalized experience, all of that. That's kind of 101. And I'm not saying that companies are great at doing that yet, but that's an obvious one. For me, and I don't think there's an answer to it yet, but this is where I guess what I'd like to see is I follow a very basic principle, like a 3 framework, 3 S's. So it's success, satisfaction, sentiment. We've kind of talked about this already, but you know, every interaction should have success. It should at least achieve the goal that the customer sets out to, whether that's, you know, pay a bill or get some information. Then you've got satisfaction. It's got to be done in a satisfactory way. So this might be having the right channel available, you know, phone or live chat. It might be being open at the right opening hours to suit your customers' needs. And it can just be as basic as having, you know, a reasonable, knowledgeable person to speak to on the other side. Success and satisfaction. You can have success, by the way, without satisfaction. You know, we can still achieve a goal, but we might speak to someone horrible who we don't want to speak to. So they need to be both there. And then it's sentiment. So really, you're never going to create a good customer experience, a memorable customer experience, a loyalty creating customer experience, unless you engage a bit of sentiment somehow, just creating a little bit of emotion in your customer, enough for it to trigger a memory for them to see your experience as positive. And that, I think, is where technology, there isn't an easy answer as to how it's going to do that yet. But I think if and when it can, that would be amazing. And I say that there isn't an easy answer to doing this yet, but I gave an example in a training session, actually, of a company called Fit. They're an on-demand company. I'd contacted their customer service, their contact center, and they delivered this really great bit of customer experience, which included a bit of service recovery, to your point, Miles. And it really did engender that sentiment. And I've never thought about it before, but somebody in the training session said to me, "How do you know that wasn't a bot?" And I thought, oh, it could have been a bot, actually. It would have to be a very well-trained and well-programmed bot, but it could be. And then that made me think my point around AI technology not being able to engender that sentiment yet. Actually, we're not a million miles away from it. It is possible. It's just I don't see companies doing it. Or they are, and the bots are just that good that I've mistook them for a human.
And you said a great phrase when we were preparing for this, Katie, and you said, we all know technology is the answer, but what's the question?
Yeah.
And I think that when we were having that discussion really got my brain kind of stimulated in terms of actually, well, what is the question that we're asking for when we talk about tech? Just explain for everybody else that wasn't on our preparation call what you meant when you said that and how that relates to this topic around technology.
Oh, it's quite simply that premise of there is just so much available right now. There's constantly new tech coming out, gets us all excited. You know, it's sexy, it's shiny, it's new, and we're very quick to throw a bit of money at it and bring it in. But actually, for what purpose? And that's that whole, you know, technology is the answer, but hang on, what's the question again? It's you know, it's not. Technology isn't necessarily the answer. Before we look to invest in any customer experience related technology, anything we think is going to enhance the customer experience, we need to come right back to the beginning and actually ask, you know, what is it we're trying to do? What innovation are we looking for? Or what problem are we trying to solve? and then look to see what technology can provide that answer. How can it fix your problem? How can it help you with the challenge? How can it support you with the innovation you're striving for? But don't just jump on something like conversation analytics, like Gen AI. Don't waste your money, because ultimately it would be a waste of money. You need to just make sure you have strategy behind your technology expenditure.
And Miles, I'm going to ask you to build on that point, because I think we can all recognize that a lot of some of the challenges that we've got within the contact center or any industry is sometimes driven by the implementation of the technology and the poor implementation of the technology. So what do contact centers need to be mindful of when they're going through that, I suppose, that discovery of technology, and how do they avoid those pitfalls so it's not a poorly implemented approach that's going to impact all different lines of the center, the process, and how we deliver a good customer experience? So how do we avoid a poor implementation of tech?
So I'm going to come back to what Katie said, actually, because that's spot on. And what that was is, for what purpose are you looking to move to a new platform? What problem are you trying to solve? All these other things. Now, AI technology, it's a minefield out there. There's so much. Now, I posted something about 2 weeks ago of me talking to camera that wasn't me. It was a digital clone. No one picked up on it. So,
Scammed us.
That's quite scary. Check it out if you want to have a look later on. But for me, it's the problem that many companies seem to take is that, okay, we've got this system here, this CRM, this ticketing system, it's omni-channel, all this stuff, but it doesn't do these one or two things that we now think are really, really important, but this other one does. So what we're going to do is we're going to buy this new product. We're going to pick up everything as is from the existing product and place it into the new product. So effectively, that's a massive mistake, because you're not actually critically evaluating what it is that you want to change and improve from a more holistic standpoint. You're picking a piece of technology because it does AI, for example, something like that. And I've seen firsthand companies waste millions of pounds on doing something like this, only to find that the new product doesn't do something that was critical in the old product. And we're going to have to now invest money in reconfiguring it, doing whatever else. There's another angle to this as well, in that, I think vendors need to be doing more to ensure that their customers are successful in their implementations. And it's not like that. We're at this sort of strange mid-place between a fully software developed coded platform, a no-code click set configuration platform. And the problem with that is that there's no sense of taking a proper agile methodology to saying, right, these are the things that we want to achieve. These are the things that the product does. This is what it's going to cost. Now, just tailoring that back to personalization a little bit. When it comes to personalization or efficiency, so many companies are jumping on the chatbot scenario. We've seen some horror stories about that, actually, with DPD, if everyone's seen that particular story. Yeah. But that's the wrong way to think about AI in the first place, as far as I'm concerned. For me, what you want to do before you even move to another platform is integrate a third-party AI, taking care of data protection and everything else, to really understand what the current situation looks like. That can actually bring out some really interesting stuff. So conversational analytics we talked about earlier, where you've had a conversation with a particular customer and they might have happened to mention something like the football score. Seems really innocuous, but it's a comment they made. I'm not a football fan myself, but the agent needs to be able to see that at the front line when they're interacting with somebody, to say, oh, there was a comment here, might be worth mentioning it. That's going to build that level of personalization. That wasn't the question that you asked me, Gary, but when it comes to avoiding those things, it's very much about not just picking up and moving what you've currently got to a new system. Take that opportunity, take your time, manage it properly, and be really, really certain what it is that you need the system to achieve, and make sure that it can do that for you.
Yeah, and you know what? I think there's a theme in some of the stuff that we've talked about in terms of engaging people at the right time and engaging the right stakeholders to inform the evolution of something. And it's not replicating the existing, and it's building something that's going to change and evolve you to a different state.
It's an opportunity, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I always kind of say, if you want transformation, you have to take transformative action. That doesn't necessarily then mean let's just recreate the old in the new? Because what was the point in implementing it other than maybe being more cloud oriented? We've got around 4 or 5 minutes left, and I've got a couple of questions that I want to ask. One of the things that I was hoping to get from you guys would be some of your top tips for contact centers who are striving to deliver more of a customer centric environment. So I'm going to come to yourself, Katie, and just say, right, if you were giving advice to somebody in the audience who was saying, right, how do we actually build a really good customer centric strategy? What would be some of your top tips and suggestions to help them achieve that?
I feel like this is going to sound like a really boring answer, but it goes back to something Miles said earlier about just every so often coming right back to the beginning and just kind of almost starting afresh. I'm not talking about technology. I'm not saying rip it all out, although sometimes that is the best solution. No, I'm talking about customer understanding. So it just comes back to the point around insight. You know, we so often think we understand our customers. We so often think we know what they want, we know what they need, we know what they expect, and we get into this rhythm of trying to deliver on that, which is great. But actually, to what I was saying earlier around insight collection, there are very few companies who have a robust enough approach to actual real insight and understanding of their customers. We know loads of companies are great at collecting data. Some are pretty good at turning it into insight. Fewer are less good at actually using that insight, and hardly any are brilliant at bringing all of this insight together. So genuinely, everything we've talked about around, you know, strategy, around technology use, around bringing in your team, it all comes back to insight. So I would say the biggest tip I could give you is go away, talk to everybody who's got some ownership over some insight. What are they doing with it? And bring it together and refresh that process basically, and make sure that whatever you are doing, however you're moving forward, you are using a really strong foundation of good, usable customer insight. Yeah. That's how I would say.
Do you know what? I totally agree. And I've seen that done really well in cross-functional environments where they've got customer experience forums. So it's people that are coming from all walks of the business that own part of the customer journey, and they're talking about the voice of the customer, the voice of the process, and the voice of the employee as it relates to each of their specific stage in the customer journey, but then sharing that across the department, across the business, across the areas. So it becomes a much more joined up, action-oriented conversation that drives continuous improvement rather than that siloed thinking and neglecting different aspects of insight. So I think that's a really powerful one.
And, you know, also I think having that process, undertaking that process of recognizing what insight you've got where and who owns it, it also enables you to spot those insight gaps and fill them. And this isn't a client I was working with, but I was talking to a telecoms company who actually were submitting awards at the UK International Awards last week. And they told me how they had 645 customer journeys mapped. 645. Now, they were not like individual random customers. They're just the actual, that's the volume of different customer journeys that the company experiences, you know, different personas, all of the different nuances. And every one of those journeys has an owner. But think of the insight that is generated from that alone. So it's not an easy task. And obviously, if you go to the depth that they have and are incredibly disciplined on that, but it is invaluable, and it will just help you to make the right decisions.
Brilliant. And Miles, if I was to ask you the same question, if you were going to give some top tips for customer centric adoption for our audience, where would you start?
I would say we're just realizing that you don't have to accept the status quo because a lot of people feel safe in the status quo. It's no secret. The big thing is around changing the mindsets and changing the way we view contact centers, both the frontline staff all the way up through management. So, you know, really start to engage with your team and get them excited about being able to make change happen. So every week you should be sitting down with your team and talking through feedback that you've had from customers, both good and bad, looking at what the top query drivers are and opening it up for discussion around how we can change it. Now, I'd suggest, of course, going back to the start, as Katie mentioned earlier, and thinking about what experience do we want customers to have and what do we think about customers? How do we want them to feel? let's now look at the data. So Katie mentioned that as well. And then let's actually make change happen. Let's empower that frontline team and say, okay, this happens a lot. What could we do in this quite common scenario that happens? What can we do there to make a customer really feel valued and really feel thankful for being one of our customers? A lot of this is that there's lots of tangible things you can do around KPIs, metrics, behaviors, data, all of this stuff. But the thing that's going to impact change most is if you can engage and excite your team around the fact that they have a voice and they can make change happen. All of a sudden, you've got, like I said earlier, 10 people on the front line just dealing with tickets day in, day out. If you change that dynamic, you've got a team of 10 experts in customer experience, and every waking moment of thinking of ways that they can make things better for your customers. The impact of that is phenomenal.
10 black belt, 6 Sigma agents driving change. Love it. Well, we've come to the top of the hour, so I'm going to say a huge thank you to everybody that's tuned in. A huge thanks to Katie and Miles for taking the time out to kind of be involved in the preparatory sessions for this, and then to actually join the session itself. So it goes without saying that it's hugely grateful. So I appreciate that. We have just finished our 40th episode. So a nice round number. We've got episode 41 on the 21st of November, where I've got Phil Anderson, Chris Rainsforth, Scott Buddin, and Julie Mordew, where we're talking about workforce management and employee onboarding processes. So that's going to be an exciting one. That will round us off before Christmas. So the last thing for me to say is huge thanks to everybody, and I'll see you on the next one. I'll ask Katie and Miles just to stop on for 60 seconds more, but I will bid you all farewell and say thank you very much for tuning in. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.